into in terms of, I guess, on the email or in a phone call. Becky Hawes-Baggett is our Director of Operations. She's also the one that is mostly spearheading the HR side of MNA's COVID response. So if there's any problems or any questions that pop up around COVID and making sure that your vistas are as safe as possible, Becky might be a person that we might call in. The other person that you will likely run into is Jamie Lewis, who's our Finance and Data Manager. She's the one that often runs invoices, host site payments. She is the lead on the housing benefit. So again, she's probably going to be popping up in your email if she hasn't already. We wanted to just kind of put a face to an email because it's so easy in a digital world to kind of lose that. So broadly, what we're looking for today is to get everybody a good working understanding of VISTA, of AmeriCorps, of what the expectations are of us and of you guys as supervisors, and kind of get you prepared to supervise a member, to understand kind of what some of the common hurdles are, but also to be prepared to celebrate the really good things. Because, you know, we talk a lot about the bad, but there are some really great things to being a VISTA and the supervising one. And then we want to kind of get you connected with your fellow supervisors. That's one of your tabs in your supervisor binder that is either at your door or on the way soon, is the supervisor contact information. You guys are all incredible. There's a lot of, you know, very experienced supervisors here and that have been on the call on Wednesday. So again, we want you guys to feel connected and to feel like there is a support system in VISTA supervisors around the state. So, and with that being said too, if you've got any questions as we go through this, or if you've got any questions and comments, a lot of you guys, again, are really experienced supervisors. So if you have anecdotes, raise your hand, unmute yourself, type it into the chat. We'd want to hear your feedback and your thoughts. So let us know. All right, so we're going to give you a little bit of VISTA 101. It's enough to be dangerous in the background of AmeriCorps VISTA and of the national service movement in the country, because it's actually a fairly long history, sort of. So VISTA, for reference, stands for Volunteers in Service to America. It was started in 1963 with John F. Kennedy envisioning a national service corps, much like the Peace Corps. LBJ eventually put it into fruition in the Economic Opportunity Act in 1964. So VISTAs have been serving for years. The first cohort started in January of '65, and there were about 2,000 members that had started. Since then, VISTA's grown, and VISTA has started to merge into AmeriCorps, which started with Clinton. So when we talk about AmeriCorps, essentially AmeriCorps is the overarching, and then VISTA is one of the branches. So this is a pretty good, flow chart, for lack of a better term, of how the national service structure in the country works. So when we refer to CNCS, that is the Corporation for National and Community Service. They are the top, they're our federal partner. They are the ones that control both Senior Corps, which is, you know, a sister branch essentially to AmeriCorps, the Social Innovation Fund, and then AmeriCorps itself. And then when you get to AmeriCorps itself splits into 3 branches. VISTA is one of those branches. Also is NCCC, which is the National Civilian Community Corps, which I never remember. And the state and national, a lot of you guys have probably heard of state and national AmeriCorps members. They're the ones that do City Year is a state and national organization. College advisors are often state and national. A lot of their really direct service of reading to kids, of building things, of working to support education, those are often state and national AmeriCorps members. VISTA, again, is the capacity building wing of AmeriCorps. So why does this matter to you guys? It doesn't always, but when we refer to Melissa, our CNCS program officer, Melissa Miller is our new CNCS program officer. As you see in the middle, that regional office, it was traditionally a state office before with Kathy Sharp, if you know the name. It is just like literally in the last 6 months, shifted over to a regional model where we are part of essentially a conglomerate of states in the Midwest region, essentially. It's a new CNCS remodeling. It shouldn't have a ton of effect on you, but it will shift who we report to and our level of contact with the Corporation for National and Community Service. So if you hear Melissa Miller, that's who we're talking to. She's often the person that we go to if you have atypical questions that we want to just make sure that we're heading in the right direction for. She's the one that approves our VADs. She's the one that you know, provides a lot of the background national support for our program. Yeah, and the Midwest Regional Office is located in Columbus, Ohio. So, by the way, we use a lot of really old pictures because no one ever updates the pictures. So there might be some old vistas that you may have seen in the past. But so what really is VISTA? This is the sustainability wing of AmeriCorps. The goal is to eradicate poverty by building capacity within nonprofits and educational institutions around the country. So traditionally, projects are developed with a 3-year timeline. So host sites in our program often have a 3-year grant cycle timeline, 3 to 5 years. And then the intention is either that, you know, the capacity has been built and the VISTA will move on to another organization, or the VISTA will move on and the projects will move on to a different side of the organization with a different goal to build different capacity. So VISTAs are a 1-year service, but obviously the arc of building a capacity is often not 1 year, which is why there's a 3 to 5 year grant cycle for that. What do we mean by capacity building? So capacity building is one of those really broad terms that everybody, especially in VISTA world, throws out a lot, but is not always super well defined. Capacity building is essentially building infrastructure, expanding partnerships, and securing like long-term resources that will increase the capacity of your organization to serve other people. So your VISTA is often not doing the direct service. They're not supposed to do the direct service, but they're not the ones in the front lines, but they're the ones that are expanding your ability to do the frontline work and to help others. So what does it mean if you have a multi-year grant cycle for a VISTA? So for a lot of you guys, you're probably in the mid-range of your grant cycle, but that's not always the case. So the first year is often a building block. It's the first year of the VISTA. There's not a ton of long-term capacity building expected, but this is where they lay the foundation. And then through the 3 to 5 year grant cycle, consecutive VISTA members will then continue to build and continue to expand on the ability of the organization to serve. It looks different for a lot of places, but if you're in, you know, year 3 or 4 or 5, that's when you're going to really look to make sure that your VISTA is using their time to really lock in the capacity build and to create sustainable solutions. So your grant cycle year was on your application. I would recommend that you look into that and that you kind of understand that in terms of where you should be and how sustainable your VISTA should make their service. Does that make sense? I think so. Cool. So how does MNA fit into this? So Michigan Nonprofit Association, and we just confirmed this, is the largest VISTA grant holder in the state. So by being grant sponsors, we're able to offer host sites and VISTAs technical assistance, payroll assistance, operations, training, and the grant reporting so that you guys can then focus on, you know, expanding the reach of your VISTA. It's a pretty atypical setup for VISTA programs. We think it's the best way to really allow nonprofits to get all of the benefits of the VISTA and minimal grant reporting is what we aim for. We'll take the boring, fun stuff, and you guys can focus on making the sustainable change. So our VISTA members are located pretty much everywhere in the state. We have one member in St. Ignace in the UP. We've got multiple members in Lansing, in Detroit, Grand Rapids, in rural areas around the state. And so we're truly a statewide program. But that also means that we can offer a lot of perspective for our VISTA members that they can then bring back to nonprofits around the state. So we wanted to walk through a couple good resources and things that you might run into during your VISTA year. This is not meant to be an end-all be-all overview of VISTA benefits and VISTA resources, but we want you to kind of be familiar with it so that if it comes up for a VISTA during service, you know kind of roughly what it is. So one of the biggest ones that is used often is VISTA Campus. So VISTA Campus is the resource hub for members and supervisors to get information on AmeriCorps VISTA, about things that they might need to know during their training. They complete several sections on VISTA Campus before they even start their service. So they should have a pretty good understanding of it. But there's also some really great trainings and webinars for things like grant writing, volunteer management, fund development, volunteer mobilization. A lot of things are on VISTA Campus. So if your VISTA is not 100% sure where to get the knowledge for something in their VAD or for something that you ask them to do, this is a good place to start. The webinars are done by people who have actually done it. They're not just VISTAs that are doing it. And it's a really good way to direct your VISTAs to kind of a first line of information if they ever have questions about what you're doing and you don't have the bandwidth to kind of give them the full tutorial. So we're going to go through VISTA benefits very quickly too, because this is often a thing that's going to come up. And again, you don't need to know everything, but it's enough to get you dangerous. So the VISTAs receive a living allowance twice a month, the 15th and the 30th, if you're interested. The living allowance annually is $15,257. So that's divided up into 24 total payments. The intent is that it allows VISTAs to live at or near the poverty level, which allows them to relate to folks in poverty. That being said, it's a fairly low amount. So doing what you can to support your VISTA and to understand that it is a pretty low amount goes a really long way into building a relationship with your VISTA member. So VISTAs also get 10 sick days and 10 vacation days annually. They also get federal holidays that your host site also has off. So a good way to kind of think of when your VISTA is not serving and it's not their specific vacation days is if it's a federal holiday that your host site also closes for. So if your host site closes for the 4th of July, the VISTA gets the 4th of July off. If your host site is open, the VISTA is still expected to serve. So that's a good thing to kind of be aware of. It's a little bit atypical, but that's how their holiday rules go. So if they're out of the office, if your VISTA is using your vacation time, let them know, and please let us know. It's very helpful because then we won't be bugging them on their day off or on their sick day. It's something that a lot of VISTAs forget, but it is really helpful to our organization to know. They'll also mark it on their timesheet that you'll be copied on, but it's good for us to know in the moment. So then one of their other really major benefits of VISTA service is the end of service benefit. So that's either the Siegel Education Award or the cash stipend. The Education Award is $6,195 this year, and that's to be used towards student loans or future educational expenses. That unlocks as soon as their service is done. So that's not something that they can access during service, but once their service ends, that's when they'll be able to get it. The other option is the cash stipend. So that is $1,800 that's paid out in their last paycheck. Your VISTA can pick. We recommend that they start at the Siegel Education Award if they're eligible, and then you can switch to the cash stipend. But if those things come up, that's a good thing to know. If they have questions about any of this stuff, please refer to them to us. This is stuff that we deal with a lot, and it's pretty easy to handle, but just so that you know kind of roughly the numbers that the VISTAs are talking about this year. The other big thing that VISTAs will often have questions on, because it's not the most user-friendly system, is the VISTA healthcare. So again, this is just as a primer to kind of understand what the VISTAs are working with. So we have a healthcare allowance and a healthcare benefit through IMG Global, I think. So it is, the healthcare allowance is a reimbursement plan for those who already have insurance. So it will cover up to $6,600 of out-of-pocket expenses. They are, fair warning, and this is a good thing to remind the VISTAs too if they're concerned, they're a slow program to reimburse. I would say, I mean, it's several months to reimburse a qualified health expense. We wish it was faster. We've worked to make it faster. It is just a slow beast. But that's something to be aware of, and something to direct them to either us or to IMG to ask questions about that. They're good for the money, but it's just a slow process. The other thing is that there's the health benefit program. So the health benefit program is for those who don't have insurance, but it's a very basic healthcare option for VISTAs that are not interested in purchasing insurance on the healthcare marketplace. This is something that they'll have received information about when they start their service, but kind of something to continue to be aware of as the VISTA continues their service. So we've kind of gone through this, and it's pretty clear, right, that being a VISTA is not the first way to get riches and money in your pocket very quickly. So what can you do to support your VISTA if your organization is able to? There's a couple things that you're not allowed to do, and then there are things that we would recommend. So the things that you really need to avoid is you need to avoid direct cash payments. You can't just give your VISTA additional cash. You can do reimbursements. You can do, some level of gift card, but it can't be a direct cash payment to your VISTA, which is why for our housing benefits, it goes directly to a landlord. That's the reason why, is that it's against federal regulations to have a direct cash payment. The other thing is that it has to be equitable for all of your VISTAs. So if you've got one VISTA, no worries. But if you've got 3 VISTAs, all of your support needs to be equal across the board. We'd hope that that's something that we don't need to say, but it's certainly something to consider. That all of the support should be distributed equally to VISTAs. So what are good things that you can do to support VISTAs? If you have specific housing accommodations, so if you are an organization like Habitat for Humanity and you have, a house that VISTAs can live in, that is a very positive, huge issue that can eliminate a lot of the stress of housing. Other things that are really common and genuinely are important to VISTA members, if you've got extra clothing or promotional items from your organization, most people won't turn down a free t-shirt. If you've got, if you're going to take your VISTA out to lunch, totally great. Virtual lunch, I guess, in this particular instance. But, if you can provide, and this is, I think, one of the really important ones, if you can provide ongoing training, if you can provide additional, professional development money, if you can, do what you can to get your VISTA as much professional development, and it doesn't have to be a monetary thing. It can also just be bringing your VISTA to meetings that are important, or connecting them with people in your community that are movers and shakers. That's really important, and that's a lot of what people that are becoming VISTAs are looking for, and that's a huge impact. That is a pretty low cost if that's an issue for your organization, as it is for many. So be creative. If there's things that you can do to help support your VISTA, I think it's worth it to do it, especially if they're minimal cost to you, if they are, an extra couple coffee mugs laying around, things that can make your VISTA feel like part of your organization. It's really important and really, really valued. But 2 big things to remember: you can't be a direct cash payment to your VISTA, and it has to be fair and equitable for all of your VISTA members. So, and this is one of those, if you have questions on what's an acceptable way to support your VISTA, reach out, let us know. We can work through that process with you.
This is Ashley. I do have a quick question. I'm wondering about gifts.
Yeah,
can you give an example, like maybe like a gift for their birthday or, that, but what else do you have in mind?
Yeah, for sure. So gifts for the birthday is a thing. A welcome, people have done like welcome baskets essentially for VISTAs that are, smallish gifts that are, like a t-shirt that is related to something that they're interested in, or some coffee mugs or something like that. Welcome gifts are really big. Exiting gifts are also a thing that I've heard of, that are, like, thanks for your service this year. You are really valued. Gifts vary. Essentially just like small things that are not direct monetary benefit to the VISTA should be pretty acceptable for a gift.
Meredith, I also have a couple questions.
Yeah, what's up?
What is the housing stipend amount this year? Has it changed? I think it was $50. I was a Vista. I wonder if that changed.
Totally fair. So it varies per host site organization, but I think for you guys that is still $50. So yeah.
Okay. And then the other question was about, does MNA have a PD bank? There was one a couple years ago.
Yes, yeah, so they do. It's a $225 annual PD bank. So that is still a thing that's still totally in existence. And it's something we for sure encourage people to use virtually now. But yep, that is still a thing. I think it comes up later. Cool.
This is Ashley. I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah,
now
for
that we're
sure.
in the virtual world, one of the things we're considering is a cell phone stipend.
Yes.
Is that possible if it's paid through like a expense report or something like that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question and something that's come up a lot. So, and Sarah, feel free to jump in too. But so yes, it's acceptable if it's a reimbursement form. So if your Vista can essentially fill out the expense report that says, yeah, I spent X amount for a cell phone or X amount for internet is one of the other ones that has come up recently. That's an acceptable way to support Vistas. Oh, that's a good one. Michelle also mentioned too that they provide Vistas with a hotspot or a computer for use. I know when I was at Vista, we used hotspots as well that we were provided with from our organization. So that's another good way to kind of provide internet, because internet can be a very huge, reliable, high-speed internet that's acceptable for work can be a pretty high barrier to clear for some Vistas.
And regarding the cell phone stipend, you don't have to cover their whole cell phone bill. I mean,
right. Honestly,
MNA provides a majority of, I think, all staff now with a cell phone stipend, and it's a portion. But like Meredith said, that's just basically in the expense report. And if you want to, if your practice is to require documentation and you want to see their cell phone bill or whatever, you can request that. But it doesn't have to be the full amount, but I'm sure that would be appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Any other questions or thoughts about supporting Vistas, reimbursements, internet and cell phone, anything like that? Because these are really good questions. Cool. Well, if you've got questions in the meantime too, throw them in the chat bar too, or feel free to unmute and ask the question too. Yeah, and please feel free to ask any questions just when we get to a slide that you've got thoughts on. Awesome. So we're going to go through some of the restrictions that are in place for Vistas and through Vista service. So outside employment restrictions are a thing that comes up almost always with Vista members. So Vista members are allowed to have other employment as long as it follows a couple rules. So it must be legal, must be part-time, it can't conflict with the Vista service is really the key, and then it can't violate any applicable federal, state, or local laws. This is something to consider as there are different laws with federal and state. The federal wins in the sense of it can't conflict with any of them. But the big issue too is that it can't conflict with your Vista's ability to do their service. This is one of those things that often Vistas will kind of work out with their supervisor, but when it comes to jobs, when it comes to taking classes on the side, that kind of stuff, so really the big restriction is that it can't conflict with your Vista's ability to do their service effectively. So what it looks like to get an outside employment request form is that it's in your binder, but also Vistas will have access to it. And it's also on mnavista.org, which FYI, big plug, is a good place to get any spare forms that your Vista might have lost, or you guys might have lost, or I forgot to send. Equal likelihood of all. So what's going to happen when you fill out your form is that the Vista will fill out their section of the outside employment request form. You'll review it, and yes, I will give an example in a hot second, Jennifer. You'll review it, and then you'll sign it as long as you think that, the job is acceptable and it doesn't conflict with their ability to serve. We will take it. We will approve it if it's applicable, and then we'll send it to CNCS. CNCS has the final say on whether a job is acceptable or not. 95% of the time it's fine as long as it's gone through everyone else's review process, but it's something to watch. So part of the reason that they do this is that for a long time VISTAs weren't allowed to have side jobs, but the reason why there's a form for this now is that they're also collecting data on the level of living stipend that makes VISTA service open and accessible to everyone. So it's really important that your VISTA actually does fill out this form and actually does complete the job and give enough data for CNCS to understand that the living stipend is a little low. So Jennifer, good question. So can you give an example of a job that might follow Michigan laws, conflict with federal laws? I have heard of VISTAs in the past that have worked at marijuana dispensaries or have wanted to, but because it's conflicting in federal laws, you can't do that. So not something that you normally would run into, but something to watch and kind of something to gut check. But as long as it's federally legal and state legal, it's no biggie. So the other restriction is on education. So VISTAs are allowed to attend classes when they're serving as a VISTA. Not a big deal. It's been done before. We just had a VISTA this year complete their master's degree. She was a busy woman. So the key is that it's as long as it doesn't interfere with VISTA responsibilities. So if a VISTA is enrolled in classes before they become a VISTA, it's still important to discuss those classes with their supervisor. Oftentimes you can work together and find, a good common ground and a good way for the VISTAs to complete their VISTA activities, but also, work with the school. If there ends up being a conflict, let us know. This is one of those things that often is not going to have to be escalated to the point of talking to MNA, but if it does, let us know, and we can work through a way to try and find a solution to that conflict. So again, no biggie if they take classes as long as it doesn't interfere with their VISTA service. So this one's a really important one this year. So these are prohibited activities on VISTA time is what we're getting into right now. So VISTAs are not allowed to engage in partisan political activities or other political activities designed to influence the outcome of an election of any public office. So that includes participating in, endorsing, signing petitions, registering to vote. They can register to vote, but they can't run voter registration drives, just to be clear. It's a lot of things that they're just not allowed to do on VISTA time. The one kind of workaround is that they can participate in political activities as long as they are not on VISTA time and not identified as a VISTA member. This is normally not a big deal if you're in a place like Detroit or Lansing, that's a bigger city. But if you're in a rural area, it can get really tricky because often, it's a pretty small population and people are pretty aware of what you do for work. So if your VISTA runs into anything like this, please reach out to us. This is very much one of those situations where it's the ask permission, not forgiveness route, because VISTAs can and have been discharged from service for it. And it can get ugly pretty quick. And Sarah shared a really good example in the last supervisor orientation about essentially, you'd think that it wouldn't be, you look at the examples, right? Well, like, of course your VISTA is not going to go to a rally when they're on VISTA time, right? But a VISTA member, and I believe this is the story, is a VISTA member was serving with a nonprofit and they went to a community meeting, which is a pretty common example of what VISTAs do, and that's totally legit, right? But there was a petition circling for something pretty mundane. It was like a county park or something. And the VISTA signed their name on it, and their VISTA signed like, John Smith, AmeriCorps VISTA. And that's the trick where that wasn't acceptable. If he would have just signed John Smith, name blank, and he wasn't on VISTA time, not an issue. But because he signed as an AmeriCorps VISTA, it becomes an unacceptable activity. And I think he and his host site recognized that that was an issue pretty quick. They kind of noted the brain gap, and then they contacted CNCS and they worked with our program, and it ended up not being a huge deal that VISTA wasn't discharged from service, but it's very much one of those, we're in a really partisan time. It's obviously an election year. These things come up a lot, but it's something to be really aware of, because we'd hate to get a VISTA into a situation where they'd end up being discharged from service or have, some other level of disciplinary action taken for an honest mistake. So does that broadly make sense in terms of prohibited activities around voting and legislation? That's the other one too, is that VISTAs aren't allowed to advocate for or against the piece of proposed legislation. So if you're an organization that does advocacy, super great and super cool, but VISTAs can't be allowed in it. Even if it's on their off time, it's just too close of a line. And it becomes, it's too gray of an area. So something to be aware of. I know that
Lori?
Go ahead, Lori.
We have what's called our Big U team, which is about advocacy. But because of COVID, we're right now for like the next couple of months working on stuff that is not about advocacy. It's more about fundraising for something specific. It's kind of veering off what it's supposed to be doing, in other words. And when it's something like that, it's kind of a gray area because it's part of this group that's generally advocacy, but it's a particular task that isn't. Is that too gray?
So Sarah, feel free to override or feel free to share your thoughts. I think that as long as it's not specifically advocacy, and as long as your VISTAs are really clear that that's not the acceptable area, and when it starts to veer back towards advocacy, they bow out. But if it is a fundraising specific activity, I think that that's legit. Again, I think just being really aware of that line and knowing that you're kind of in the gray area, but that you're on the non-prohibited edge of the gray area, essentially, is where I would land on that. Again, I think it's just being really aware of where that line is and being square with your VISTAs of what's acceptable and what's not. Cool.
And just know a lot of this stuff, right, we're going to go over with the VISTAs as well when we have VISTA orientation. Yeah. So it's really not solely your job. It's just good stuff for you to know as these things come up, and then they may talk to you because they're seeing you every day versus us, they're seeing once in a while.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's a good point too. And yeah, a lot of this stuff is kind of gray and kind of odd, and it's grayer than you'd think it would be normally, because you're like, oh, of course your VISTA's not going to go campaign, but then it just gets gray. So again, if you ever have any questions about this, please reach out. This is definitely one of those things where it's better to ask permission than forgiveness, like a lot of the prohibited activities in VISTA world. So yeah, reach out, have a conversation with your VISTAs. I think the biggest thing is to just be really clear about where that line lies. So cool. Other prohibited activities. So VISTAs can't engage in religious instruction, and they can't conduct worship services. They can't engage in any form of religious proselytizing. It's a really hard word on a Friday morning. So really, again, the key is that VISTAs can work and serve with religious organizations, but they cannot specifically lead worship services or lead any specific religious instruction. Again, this is one of those, if you've got questions, if you have a community partner that happens to be, a faith-based organization, no worries, but know that that's where that line lies. Even if your VISTA, chooses to participate in the organization, they have to do it on their own time. So cool. And again, if you ever have any questions about this or you've got any concerns, let us know and we can for sure work through it. So this one is kind of atypical in the sense that when it comes to political activity and religious activity, VISTAs are obviously allowed to do that on their own time, but labor organizing, pro or anti-labor organizing, is not allowed at all during their VISTA service. So, they can't just take a day off and go to a strike. Not acceptable. So that ends up being kind of the atypical one of the group. but they're not allowed to organize or participate in protests, petitions, boycotts, or strikes. They're not allowed to engage in any pro or anti lobbying, ballot initiatives, legislation influencing, letter writing campaigns, anything like that for pro or anti-union organizing. That's just a third rail for national service workers that is just not something that that they're allowed to get near. Obviously, if you work in workforce development, you will often work with, trade unions, and that's an acceptable thing to work with and understand, the benefits of the knowledge of these people that work there. But you just can't organize for or against them. Side note, so this is one of the questions that we'll ask during our host site visits. And one of our VISTA members said, well, I honked at the UAW workers that were striking. Is that okay? And as long as you don't tell us, that's okay. So we're kind of shifting into how do VISTAs really fit within your organization, and what is a VISTA really supposed to do? So this is a lot of the negative of what they're not supposed to do, and then we'll kind of roll into what they are. So they're not an administrative stopgap. They're not supposed to cover, the 1 year that you can't get somebody to fill a position. They're really there to build capacity. So they're also not an employee of your organization. So you can't hire or fire them. You can't, receive traditional compensation. The timesheets come to us. They're limited by VISTA terms and conditions in addition to your host site terms and conditions. So it's kind of the smallest level of acceptable activity. But they are like an employee in that they work with your members of your organization. They work with community members. They should be included in staff meetings. They should be included in, standard staff get-togethers. Their work days are defined by your host site. So, if you are a host site that works 11 to 7, your VISTA should also be expected to work 11 to 7. And they are provided with regular feedback, particularly by you guys, the host site supervisors. So we're going to go through a little bit later, essentially what the administrative process is if there's an issue with a VISTA, but just please know that you can't actually say you're fired and then make them leave the building. That's not how VISTA service works. So what do VISTAs actually do? They engage in capacity building activities. They create sustainable projects. They're really the meat and potatoes of their service life is their VAD. So those are the VISTA assignment descriptions is the acronym. There's a lot of acronyms here now that I realize it. So they're expected to complete the activities lined in the VAD. They're expected to make progress towards the performance measures. We really encourage weekly meetings with supervisors, especially in a virtual world. It's really easy to lose touch, but we really, really encourage, and we'll touch on this more several places, but weekly meetings are really great. And if you don't need them, an email is totally fine. But especially for the first several months, establishing a really strong rapport with your VISTA is really important. So what are host sites expected to do? So y'all will onboard members, especially during their first day. So our orientation is the second week of September, but you guys get your VISTAs for the first couple weeks. And so, you can orient them to your host site and to your expectations as a supervisor. Provide, day-to-day coaching and supervision, and acknowledge them as VISTAs, as opposed to this is an intern, this is this is the person that does college access. They're an AmeriCorps VISTA who does college access is a thing. So yeah, there is a list of common acronyms too. So what do we share between our host sites and MNA? So we do outreach recruitment, and then you guys do the final selection of VISTA members. You guys are often responsible for writing VADs, and then we will provide feedback. We're all kind of responsible for problem solving with common VISTA issues, with supporting VISTA members, and supporting their professional development and their personal development, as well as the reporting and evaluation. as a side note, really big kudos to all of you that wrote the VADs this year. Our Melissa Miller, our CNCS program officer, said that the MNA VADs were some of the best that she's ever written or that she's ever read. And so kudos to all of you that are writing the VADs, because it's a big compliment for someone who does a lot of VAD research. So nice. This is a quick note before we get into the drier part of this, logistics and paperwork. So with COVID-19, I don't know if you've noticed, life is pretty wild, right? And there's a lot of really changing circumstances for host sites and for VISTAs around what is acceptable, what's safe, what are host sites doing. It's changed a lot, right, in the last 5 months. So for your reference, full-time telework is still an option. That's a really atypical thing for VISTA, but right now, VISTAs are allowed to onboard remotely and continue to serve remotely. We're going to have them fill out a telework request form because it's required by CNCS. But for right now, full-time telework is still totally allowed by CNCS. The other thing that we'll come up to is fingerprinting, which is traditionally something that VISTAs are required to do within the first couple of weeks of their service. It's actually been shifted to an online database check, essentially with their names. So instead of going to the police station and dealing with their fingerprints, they're going to receive essentially a background check virtually. So if that's something that has ever come up with your VISTAs before, that's not something that's going to happen this year. It will likely occur, after post-pandemic. It will probably go back to fingerprinting. But for right now, that's the expectation, is that your VISTAs will receive a background check in lieu of fingerprinting. So because things are changing, and we will let you know when things change from a CNCS perspective, but if you're curious, nationalservice.gov/coronavirus is the place where CNCS tabulates all of their most recent changes due to COVID. It's a pretty good resource. They updated it very regularly initially, and now that things have kind of leveled for the time being, I guess whatever level is, it's less frequent, but that's the place to get up-to-date CNCS opinions and thoughts on COVID. Michelle, that's a good question, and we'll figure that out. All right, so we're going to roll into logistics and paperwork. Yeah, we'll roll into logistics and paperwork. Michelle, I see your question. We'll figure it out. All right, so FYI, we are receiving 2 new VISTA leaders. They're starting the 17th with the rest of our team. They are Chris Castle, who is actually Michelle's current VISTA, and Mara Hazen, who was a former City Year member that served in Kansas City last year. So they're starting. They will send out an introductory email when their first day of service starts, kind of giving them the intro for what's going on. Please, feel free to ask them any questions too. But this is roughly kind of how the split is managed between program managers and VISTA leaders. So program managers I'm often the support for the supervisors. I'm the one that will step in if problems arise. I supervise the VISTA leaders, and then I'm the normal connection to CNCS. Whereas VISTA leaders support your VISTAs most frequently. They're a near peer support system to your VISTAs. They also help plan and facilitate the trainings. They help to share the resources among the VISTAs. They're the ones that will be coordinating all of the reporting. But they are often the first contact for your VISTAs. So if your VISTAs ever have questions, point them to your VISTA leaders, either Chris or Mara. They're both really smart, really sharp, and really confident that they'll be great additions to the team. So when are you going to hear from me? So there's a Supervisor's Digest, which is a quarterly email blast that will kind of get you up to date on what's going on in the VISTA program. We'll share blogs, we'll share updates from other VISTA members around the state. I will also be communicating with emails and phone calls with service updates. And if you have any questions or concerns about your VISTA, please reach out. I'm pretty accessible. My phone and email, I believe all of you have. Please feel free to use it. You will likely hear from the VISTA leaders periodically, but primarily with spring recruitment, and then about specific trainings and things like that. That's often when you're going to hear from your VISTA leaders. So when do you involve MNA particularly, but particularly me? So if your VISTA is getting close to using up sick or vacation days, and they mention that to you, let us know. That is one of those things, again, that is easier to handle before they're out of sick or vacation days as opposed to after. Or if they have a particular family emergency or significant illness that causes them to use up quite a few vacation or sick days, let us know. There's sometimes things that we can do to get them additional leave that will, kind of prevent them from utilizing all of their sick time or their personal time in one big chunk. So again, let us know if there's anything like that that we can help with. If there's leave that's taken without approval, or if there's other, behavioral issues, insubordination, that kind of stuff, let us know. Again, this is one of those where the earlier that we understand it, the better. It's much easier to fix a small problem than to contain, a big explosion. If there's a change in address to a VISTA project, if you guys happen to move throughout the year, please let us know. We send packages to VISTAs and we send, paperwork to you guys. Let us know so that we're not shipping it to the wrong place. If there happens to be a change in supervisor, either if you leave the organization or if there's a shifting in roles, please let us know so that we're communicating with the person that's going to work directly with the VISTA. So we talked about essentially briefly the disciplinary process, but I'm going to kind of walk through it. We hope that it's not a thing that's going to have to be used, but we all know that that's potentially an issue that may come up. So what do you do if you have a VISTA that has had a repeated problem? So we'll say it's insubordination or it's showing up late. Talk to them first. So that's what we really emphasize, that the primary relationship the VISTA is going to have is with you as a supervisor. They'll obviously work with us at MNA, they'll work with their VISTA leaders, but the primary relationship, and I think the most important relationship for a VISTA, is with their supervisor. So communicate with them. If there's something that's a problem, chat with them and outline the problem and outline what we can do to fix it. If it still is a problem, let us know, loop us in. Again, the earlier you can, the more effective it often is. So roughly what our performance plan is going to look like is we're going to go in, if you've notified us of a consistent complaint with your VISTA, we're going to talk to both you and the VISTA, and then we're probably going to implement a performance improvement plan. So that performance improvement plan is going to be a pretty straightforward document that everyone's going to complete together, and we're all going to sign it and we're all going to check in on it. So it's going to have 1 to 3 concrete issues and then ways to improve it. So if the issue is, the VISTA is constantly insubordinate and shows up late a lot, the goals for the VISTA may be as simple as you need to show up at 8 a.m. every day. You need to show up on time, notably. It could be as complicated as I need you to finish this grant by March 23rd or whatever that ends up being. It can be a huge range of spectrum. It obviously depends on what the VISTA specific issues are and what they really think that the expectations that they're not meeting are. But it can be really broad. And so we're going to go through that. We're going to have specific check-in dates. It's probably going to be about a month-long process. It's not a quick process. But we're going to have specific check-in dates that we will all check in, that you will check in with your VISTA, that MNA will check in, and we'll kind of all be on the same page so that we have really clear expectations on every side. So I will say, in terms of performance improvement plans, we've had people that have really crushed it and have benefited from the performance improvement plan that finished out their VISTA year and potentially has continued on to a second year. We've had VISTAs that have had a month on a performance improvement plan that it's ended in termination. It depends, and it depends on the person, it depends on the supervisor, it depends on the situation, but it's by no means just an exit strategy. There are genuinely a lot of VISTAs that have benefited from just very, very clear expectations and very clear levels of accountability. So what happens if we do end up losing a VISTA? So if a VISTA chooses to leave service early, please notify us as soon as you know about it. You know, we've had VISTAs that have just not shown up to service. Again, that's not something that we hope for, but if that happens, please notify us. You know, we'd like to think that we know mostly what's going on in the cohort, but that's not always the case. So again, please work with us as closely as you can. You're going to have to complete a future plans form and an exit form. And a good thing to note too is that authorization to replace a VISTA isn't automatic. So if your VISTA leaves in February, we likely won't refill that spot. If your VISTA leaves in October, we're much more likely to fill the spot, but please work with us closely. It's often a pretty quick turnaround, quick timeline to replace a VISTA, and it's not always feasible. So please work with us closely and kind of let us know where you're at in any process. So if you guys happen to request, if your sponsor, so if your host site requests removal of a member from a project, please note that we don't even have the authority to remove a member from a project. Only CNCS does. So this isn't even one of those that, you know, you just talk to MNA and MNA gets rid of them. It's just not the case. VISTA members are protected, a protected class essentially, and so they're pretty difficult to get rid of unless there's a major issue or unless we've gone through the proper channels. So likely what's going to happen is we're going to institute a performance improvement plan like we just went through. If we go through that performance improvement plan and it's just not working out and your member is going to be terminated from the site, please let us know. Again, the more that you can keep us in the loop, the more that we can communicate closely, especially on things like this, the better the outcome often is for everyone. So you can request a removal from the project. You can't request the VISTA is removed from the VISTA program as a whole. So sometimes VISTA members just aren't working out at a host site, but they will shift to a different host site, or they will shift potentially even to a different program. It's rare, but it allegedly has happened. So we're going to have to request removal in writing. This is one of those instances too that if you're noticing a problem, please document your instances in writing. Please document most of those things in writing. Again, if there's things like, you know, reliable failure to complete a task or failure to show up on time on any regular basis, please document that in writing. Again, it makes it easier for us to justify both to the VISTA member, but also the CNCS. We're also not going to withhold living payments. That's not how it works. VISTA members will receive living allowance payments until they're terminated from CNCS. So it's a pretty long process. Again, this is something that we wish didn't happen, but we also know that it will. So please let us know. Again, we do what we can to make sure that this is a successful process, but please loop us in if you're having a reliable issue with a VISTA, either with performance or behavior. Let us know. The earlier we know, normally the better the outcome is. So we're going to go through some resources real quick and some dates and some things that probably do matter to you guys. So again, MNAVISTA.org is a really good place to get paperwork. There's resource toolkits on things like grant writing or volunteer management. And that's also where we house the blogs that your VISTA members will write twice annually. The Member Assistance Program is essentially a virtual assistance program for members. So it offers unlimited in the moment telehealth counseling sessions. It also offers life planning, life coaching, medical advocacy, text counseling. It does a lot, and it's especially really helpful in a really virtual environment. So if your VISTA is having issues outside of service, this might be a good place to start on. The other thing is the program handbook. That is in your binder, but it's also on MNAVISTA.org. It's a good place to refer to if you have any questions about the rules and regulations of the MNA VISTA program and VISTA as a whole. And then the on-site orientation checklist is a big thing to note. You guys will complete that with your VISTA within the first month of their service. Even if you're virtual, you still complete it. And please do what you need to do to complete your own on-site orientation, even past that checklist. You know, whatever you do for a standard employee, we recommend that you do for your VISTA as well. So this is roughly the program dates, and there's no real dates on it, so because life is up in the air. So we have a VISTA orientation. We actually do have the dates for the VISTA orientation. It's on the next slide, but I'll say it here as well. The MNA VISTA member orientation is September 9th and 10th. So that will be virtual, and that will be essentially the whole day. So please accommodate for your VISTA to be occupied during the 9th and the 10th. We'll also have field trips throughout the spring and the fall. Leadership development / mid-year training will be held in March. We may or may not have a Shark Tank event for the human-centered design program that we'll discuss in a second. And then the end of year celebration will be held in August. We also have monthly webinars the first Wednesday of every month at 10 a.m. It's a really good way for VISTAs to both connect to the M&A team, to hear updates, and to connect with other VISTAs around the state. So please accommodate your VISTA's time and accommodate the 1 hour meeting, essentially, the first Wednesday of every month at 10. The other thing is that there are occasionally CNCS in-service trainings that VISTAs will attend that are across the country. Those are currently on hold, but obviously we're not 100% sure about what that's going to look like in the next 6 months to a year. So that's something that is an option, but currently not on the table, just so that you're kind of aware that that's a thing. So the other thing too, so VISTA orientation is virtual. It is September 9th and 10th. That is essentially where your VISTAs are going to learn most of this stuff, but then more in depth about the paperwork, about what's really required to be a VISTA. We're also going to have virtual field trips throughout the spring and the fall. Your VISTAs will learn more about that, but they're like short 3 to 4 hour training, virtual trainings about content specific information for either college access or workforce development VISTAs. So mid-year training is likely going to be in March. Might be in person, might be virtual. We're obviously closely following the COVID situation, and we'll let you know as soon as we make a decision for that. The end of year research symposium is in August. It's a really great time to celebrate your VISTA's human-centered design accomplishments, but also broadly their accomplishments as a VISTA for the year, because it's not necessarily an easy service year, but it is a really important one. So one other thing quickly about potentially that might be an option for VISTA bandwidth use, essentially, is the Russ Mobby Signature Service Project. That's held in May. It was canceled this year, but it's essentially an annual thing where VISTA members around the state, both VISTAs and state national AmeriCorps members, join together and serve and complete a day-long service project. We're hopeful that this will be back in action next year. It's certainly something to keep an eye out for. It's normally the first half of May, but we'll let you know as soon as we know more about that, and obviously as soon as we know more about the ever-changing COVID situation. So if you ever have social media, if your organization has a Facebook page, tag us, the MNA VISTA Program, Pathways to Employment VISTA Program, I think is what it is. It's a long Facebook name. We're not very active right now because I'm the only one running social media, but when we have 2 new excellent VISTA leaders, we will be tearing it up on Facebook. So please feel free to tag us. So in terms of time, what's expected for your VISTA? It's expected to have 35 to 40 hours of service for each VISTA. That's roughly 7.5 hours of service each day. If your host site is a host site that expects 40 hours of service, that's the expectation. If your host site is an organization that expects 35 hours from standard employees, that's the expectation. But it runs in that range. The minimum is 7.5 hours of service day. There's no official comp time policy, but if your VISTA is really, is putting in a lot of time to do an event, or they're serving on a weekend for an event or for outreach or something like that, it's totally fair to offer some flexibility within the schedule. So maybe it's leaving a little bit early on Friday, or maybe it's taking that Monday off. Work it out with your VISTA. Again, as long as you hit the 35 to 40 hours of service a week, we're pretty cool with whatever you decide to work out. If your VISTA uses their personal or sick time, please have them notify both you and their VISTA leader. And if your site is closed, this is kind of atypical, but if you are serving in person, and some host sites are, if your host site's closed for more than 2 days, your VISTA is still expected to serve. This is pretty standard for those of you that are all teleserving. They're still expected to serve, but it's a good heads up if we do eventually go back into in-person service. So in terms of reimbursement, host sites are responsible and expected to reimburse mileage for VISTAs as they travel for their service. This is likely not a huge issue right now, but again, as we ramp up potentially to more travel, this might be the case. There's not a specific reimbursement form that we require you to use, as long as you use the reimbursement form that's used by your organization, totally fine. There's not a mileage reimbursement amount that we require. Again, as long as whatever standard for your organization is fine. Dress code is dependent on your host site. If you're a host site that is serving remotely and you guys are in jeans and a t-shirt, totally fine. If you guys are business casual while serving remotely, also totally fine. Just convey that to your VISTA and you know, expect that they will adhere. For trainings, we often expect, you know, business casual to casual. We will communicate that with our VISTAs before time, but that's the pretty solid standard for MNA trainings. Also, VISTA gear is always accepted. So we do complete site visits normally at least once a year. We shoot for 2, but you know, we aim for 2. So these are likely going to be virtual, at least in the fall, and then potentially in person in the spring. Again, it's all dependent on what COVID presents and what our state is currently in. We will schedule those probably October, November kind of thing, so that, you know, your VISTA is settled in, but they still are pretty early in their service year. So kind of keep an eye out for that. It's a really good way to show off what your VISTA has been doing, and it's a really good way to, again, celebrate your VISTA's achievements and kind of troubleshoot any issues that might arise. We do 2 evaluations annually. So there's a 6-month evaluation, and then there's a year-end evaluation that you're expected to complete with your VISTA. It's a really good way to give VISTAs a chance to both evaluate themselves, but also receive, you know, good and helpful feedback. VISTAs aren't penalized for any, you know, non-satisfactory report. So obviously honesty is always a good thing, but it's a really good way to take a look at how we can shift things around if there's early problems. So very quickly, we have 2 types of reporting, the monthly report and the quarterly progress report. The monthly report is more informal. It's kind of like a check-in, but it's also really helpful to help VISTAs remember what they've done for the last, you know, quarter of the year. I don't know about you guys, my brain is not very functional right now. So the more help we can use remembering what we've done 3 months ago, the better. The quarterly progress report is the important one. It is what is required to be signed off on by you. It's what we use to get our data that we send back to CNCS. So it's a pretty important report in terms of narrative, but also in terms of data. This is the one that you will review with your VISTA before they submit it. You're not required to review the monthly report with your VISTA. Sometimes they just don't copy you on it, and that's acceptable. Again, it's not confidential, but it's not a requirement that you review the monthly reports with your VISTA. Quarterly progress reports it is, because it's the important data collection piece. We encourage your VISTA to start on those as early as they can, and to kind of continue to reflect and continue to prepare for those throughout the year, as opposed to leaving them to the last couple of days, because it makes it a lot easier. So we also do check-in calls, blogs that are assigned twice a year, and weekly email updates for the VISTA members. It's just a good way to check in with our VISTAs and to kind of see how things are going. They might have quarterly check-in calls with the VISTA leaders. Again, we're kind of always in communication with your VISTA members to try and see what we can do to provide them with more resources and more additional updates. Blogs are a really great thing that I really think is a cool part of our program. Your VISTA will write to a year, and then they're posted on the mnavista.org site, and then they're also shared to Facebook. It's a really good way for your VISTA to both reflect on how things are going in their service, but also, you know, to share how great things have been in the service that they've done for the last 6 months. So great thing to share. If you happen to run your organization's social media account, it's another great thing to boost on your social media account to kind of share what your VISTA member's doing. Last couple things, I promise, because I'm starting to lose my voice. So CNCS orientation, it's called the virtual member orientation that your VISTA member will complete on their first day of service. So for most of you, that's the 17th. For some of you, that's the 31st. So the VMO big statement is required for your member. It is at 3 o'clock on their first day of service, 3 o'clock Eastern. They will receive some level of login information for this, and they'll receive, you know, the required email from CNCS that will outline this, but it's really important that you also make sure that your member attends this 3 p.m. launching your VISTA service live webinar. It's where they take their oath of office. It's where they, you know, officially become a VISTA member. Again, it's required by CNCS. So normally we'd ask that you be present for that. Obviously in a virtual environment, that's likely not the case, but it's something to certainly emphasize with your VISTA that this is a requirement that they'll need to attend. So a good thing to check in too is essentially before the service starts, check to make sure that there's not a firewall issue, that there's not an IT issue with accessing WebEx, I believe is what's running, and potentially Skype for Business. Double check that that's an acceptable thing, just so that nobody's scrambling at 2:58 to try and log into the launching your service webinar. Again, it's an extra added layer of complication because we're all virtual, but something to be aware of for sure. That was weird. So there we go. So again, for virtual member orientation, just please prepare to be present either inside or virtually for your VISTA's first day of service, and guide them to that webinar at 3. I think it's just an hour long, but it's a requirement. Your oath form is going to have to, they're going to complete their oath of office form, I believe, in their My AmeriCorps portal. Again, they have all the information for this, but again, supporting them through that on their first day and making sure that they don't have a meeting scheduled at 3 o'clock is pretty important. Again, fingerprinting is theoretically stopped in favor of a virtual background check. Michelle will figure it out. And for those of you that have members that are returning for a second year, they are not required to serve during or they're not required to attend the virtual member orientation. If there's not a break in service, you're not required to take your oath again, just as a heads up for those of you that have multiple members that are re-upping. All right, so with that, do you guys have any questions on anything that we just covered or anything in the meantime? If you do, please feel free to either unmute or share in the chat. That was a lot of information that I'm sure that I just brain dumped into you guys. So feel free to ask questions. So great. So we're going to take a break. We are going to say, let's be back at, we'll say 10:30. So feel free to take a break, walk around, check your email, do what you got to do, and we will meet back at 10:30. Thanks, everybody. Okay, great. So I think we should be good to come back. Did anybody have any questions in the meantime? Anything percolate during the break that you'd like to ask before we move on to Sarah's part of the presentation? What it means to be a VISTA supervisor. All right, great. So as before, feel free to put any questions that you've got in the comments. Otherwise, Sarah, I will mute myself and let you handle it.
Thanks, Meredith. So I get to talk about what it means to be a VISTA supervisor, which I could also say, what does it mean to be you? And if you haven't noticed, you're the supervisor. So I first want to preface this saying that we are very lucky and know that we have a lot of experienced supervisors in general, but also in the VISTA world on this call. So this is really where I hope that we get some great interaction, whether you provide input in the chat box or unmute yourself and chime in. Because in addition to experienced supervisors, we have some newer supervisors on the call today too. So any advice or suggestions you can provide is greatly appreciated. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So this first slide you're going to see is kind of a cool drawing and shows you a pretty accurate description of what is often the common cycle of being a VISTA. You'll see that sometimes that VISTAs tend to start out with a lot of enthusiasm and ideas and then quickly become a little disillusioned. They might get to the point of, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? When that starts to, when the excitement and enthusiasm starts to wear off and reality sets in, the really key thing here is when that happens is those VISTAs may need more support at those times from you as a supervisor, but also from other VISTA members and their VISTA leaders, or even other employees in your office. We're asking that, your role as a supervisor, if you see that happening, is to help push those VISTAs to making those connections. So, help them, maybe it's an idea of, I think you're maybe feeling a little overwhelmed right now or something. Maybe it's worth a conversation with the VISTA leader, or, hey, I want to introduce you to, this staff person because she is recently new with the organization and she might have an understanding of kind of what you're going through during this transition time. Something like that. One phrase you'll hear us use quite a bit is that very often in VISTA work, we describe it as the seed never sees the flower, meaning that sometimes VISTAs may never see the results of their work they're doing, but it's still vitally important, and we have to keep them motivated in the sense of keep them motivated in knowing that it is going to turn into something great, and even if they don't see it right then during that. So the next slide very much lays out the roles and responsibilities of you as a supervisor. One of those is educating the community and staff about VISTA. What's their role in the organization? Who is the VISTA? This is really important. A lot of times we'll see, especially in the beginning, that VISTAs wind up being treated like interns or entry-level employees. If you have those interns or entry-level employees, that's great. The VISTA is not that. VISTA should really be treated as that full-time member of your staff and part of everything, important to their work. So try to be cautious of other people possibly treating your VISTA in that way. Sometimes this can show up if other staff members might ask the VISTA to do things that a junior staff member might do, making coffee, whatever. This can be especially hard with young VISTAs who might be entering the workforce for the first time. And when they don't quite know how to handle that with fellow staff people. We've also seen this happen where Vistas are not included in the organizational distribution list or invited to staff meetings. And again, this becomes even more critical in a virtual world because you may not fully realize that you're leaving out a Vista if you're not seeing them all the time. Yes, we recognize they're not technically staff, but they are also serving full-time in your organization for a full year. So they should know critical information that might come out via email or in those staff meetings, things like when the building is going to be closed, or if there's inclement weather, what do they do? Another thing that the second thing here on the list is to ensure adequate resources to accomplish bad tasks. This one is incredibly important right now in the current world that we're living in. In regards to technology, our expectation, and was shared in the MOU as well, is that the Vista does have technology from your host site to do their service for the year. In the past, that's always been that's not a new requirement. That's always been an expectation from this program. What's different, we all know, is it used to be acceptable to provide a desktop in your office space. And it may still be if you're going to the office every day. I know there are people on this call that are back to working in a traditional office setting. But if you're working from home, having the ability to have a laptop or a desktop computer set up at their home is really critically important. I've talked a little bit about the other stuff too, what you can maybe do to help with the phone and email, but that computer is a critical piece and an expectation that they have that to complete their service. Again, the VAD is the Vista assignment description is a really important tool for you. Make sure that you both understand it, that you review it frequently, and that you use that really as a signpost for this year of service. Also, great to provide regular feedback, not only to the Vista, but also to the Vista leaders and program manager. We really, really, really recommend a weekly meeting. And I put 3 reallys before that statement because we see how critical that is. I think it's one thing to have it on the calendar, and if you don't have stuff to discuss, you maybe cancel it. But keep it more often than not, even if it's scheduled for an hour and you only have you need 15 minutes that week, that's fine. In the beginning, this will be crucial, but it's really crucial throughout the year. And again, I think it becomes even more and more important in a virtual space that you're checking in with them frequently. I'll tell you, when we start to hear of problems with Vistas, we'll often ask the question, are you meeting regularly? And very often the response is, well, those meetings kind of fell off because of this reason or that. And we all understand that we get busy, but those just are a critical component to helping your Vista have a successful year. So the next slide continues with a few more of those supervisor roles and responsibilities. Make sure the projects the Vista is doing is sustainable. How can this continue when the Vista is gone at the end of the year? Encourage and provide personal and professional development and opportunities for growth. Again, if you see something even out in the community, you would feel that would benefit the Vista, mention that, suggest that to them. This can be critically important as well for Vistas who might be relocating to your area. That's a big deal to move to an area that they may not know anything about, and to be able to get out and get involved in the community. And right now, they're probably going to have to try a little harder even to do that, because you can't just go to the, local coffee shop like you used to, or the, it's just less common that we're going out and doing things. So again, we're hopeful that you will support the integration of your Vistas into the organization and community. We've talked about a few things there. Virtual introduction. I know with the Vista leaders, we're going to plan a virtual happy hour. It's kind of become part of the culture at MNA since we've been working remotely. So think about fun things you might be able to do that, and ultimately just be your Vista's greatest support there. So if anyone other has creative ideas, feel free to add them there, but we'll keep going. Yeah.
So I have one thing to add to that too, and I think we can touch on it briefly later too. But on the note of being your VISTA's greatest support, please share their victories. You know, share the good things, because we often, you know, especially with M&A, because M&A often only hears about the rough things or when there are challenges. But if your VISTA's awesome and they just got featured in the paper because they did some really great work about college access, let us know and share that on your social media and share that with, you know, members of your executive team, stuff like that, because it can be a tricky year to be a VISTA, but regularly celebrating the really good things that VISTA members can do goes a long way to keep the motivation up and to continue to, you know, have a positive, really impactful service year. So share the good things too. That's all I got.
Great. So next we're going to talk about some common issues. Excuse me. And the first one is kind of right in the beginning when they're getting oriented to your organization and the community. Make sure to introduce them to key staff members and community members. Include them in staff meetings, help them feel like they've belong, give them time to settle in and relocate. These are some of the things we've mentioned. That on-site orientation form, again, comes into play here right at the beginning of their service year, and despite the name, is still very relevant and required. So make sure that you do that. Remember, it takes multiple times meeting to complete that form, and you can't just do it in 1 hour sitting down. Consider also maybe questions that you've received from previous VISTAs or other new hires that can help, you know, drive these internal actions and the internal interactions in the beginning. So because VISTAs may not know what they don't know. So if you think, you know, this is really important for VISTAs to know, or new members. I also think organizational culture is such a huge one, right? We talk about it constantly, but when you really start to think intentionally about it, you can go much deeper with it. And I think it's interesting because there are culture and norms that are written down. So your VISTA is going to be provided with you're going to provide them with a copy of your organization's handbook. And those are the types of norms that are written down. Here's the holidays we have off. Here's the expectation of number of work hours, etc. But then we all know there are cultural norms that are never written down, and you don't get to know them until you've been in the organization for a certain period of time. And I think this still is very applicable in a virtual space, even if you're not in your office. You know, in your office, it might translate to something like, we have a water cooler, and if you empty that water cooler, you better put a new jug on there, or people you work with are not going to be happy. Things like in the virtual space, you know, during staff meetings, is it acceptable that you are not showing your camera if you're on a virtual space? Or is it going to be perceived that you're not participating fully if you don't show your camera? Those are the things you can kind of clue new people to your staff in and ease their transition into the workspace. So the next one is talking about feedback and direction. Again, schedule weekly check-in meetings. I already talked about the importance of those. I really do stress the importance of those. Use their VAD during those to provide feedback and to guide those conversations. You know, partner with the VISTAs to think through challenges and opportunities, and then of course helping to problem solve and coach them through their year. If there are problems, you know, a really great technique is to summarize kind of the opportunity and challenge maybe after you've had a conversation about it, and then mutually agree on next steps and how you're going to move forward with that. And oftentimes there, right, too, you can mutual agreements on the next steps, and then also when you're going to check in again on those topics. So this next one is about getting to know your member, and I think this is really critical because it will help you to guide them in the best way possible. So gaining awareness of what their prior volunteer or work experience has been, getting to understand what their short and long-term goals are, that will help you as a supervisor direct them to aspects of their service year and or other things that are happening within your organization that can help them reach those short and long-term goals. You might, ask some questions while onboarding them and in that initial step where you're reviewing the VAD. What are some things from the VAD you're really excited about? What are some things that make you anxious? And what can we do to make you feel ready to tackle your year of service? So this next one is a really great technique, I think, with anyone, is to give VISTAs ownership of their projects. So let them know it's okay to take the lead. Equip them with the resources they need to succeed. So on that first one, letting them know it's okay to take the lead, right? We say that, what do we really mean? A lot of times it's a very detailed discussion about what is okay for them to do and what is something that you'd like to see first or you'd like to have approval on before they do. Something like maybe they're in charge of recruiting volunteers, and maybe you're at the point where you say, if they've been a volunteer with our program for the last couple of years, I'm fine with you reaching out to them and introducing yourself as the new VISTA and their point of contact. But when it comes to, recruiting new volunteers, I want to see your communication that's going to go out to a potential new volunteer before it goes out. So setting those really clear expectations, and I think we all know, right, how critical clear communication is, and oftentimes what that means is getting into those details, especially when onboarding someone new. So the third one there, empowering members to bring their ideas to the table. So if they do have an idea, maybe you follow up with an ask, say, can you create a project plan or an outline or a draft for that type of project, and bring it to our next meeting? That's very empowering versus, like, here's the 6 steps I want you to do. So good things to keep in mind there. Again, agree on check-in points, clarify key objectives and milestones. Next one, around professional development. We've had a couple conversations around this already. As Meredith mentioned earlier, we do have professional development funds set aside for each VISTA. It's kind of their own personal bank in a sense that they can apply to MNA and use those funds towards training or resources. So you can certainly, as a supervisor, share with them opportunities that you see come up for that you think would be really relevant to their personal and professional development. Online trainings obviously are the kind of the norm right now. They can be VAD specific trainings. Maybe there are things that would help them beyond their project year, things like shadowing colleagues, or even, and this is probably more relevant in the later part of the year, but practicing interviewing and and reviewing resumes. And again, make sure they make time to attend the member webinars. And this is referring to MNA's webinars that are going to be monthly on Wednesdays, and those are required. So again, we mentioned them here, but that is a requirement of the program. So this slide is all about how to provide recognition and thanking the VISTAs. There's lots of opportunities here. Again, I think, we get creative, a little more creative than in the past since we're doing it in a virtual space. But I always, there's opportunities here, right? But I always think that's a great question for you to ask your VISTAs when they're onboarding. How do you prefer to be recognized? There are some VISTAs that would love to have a shout out in a full staff meeting. And there are other people who that would make them want to maybe crawl under their desk and hide because they don't like that type of public recognition. But usually people like to be recognized in some ways. Maybe that's just an email to your organization leader that says, hey, I want to let you know that our VISTA is doing awesome work, and I just wanted to acknowledge that in that space. Things you could also do, host again, most of us are talking about virtual activities, so maybe it's a virtual happy hour or recognition, or a lunch where you're eating lunch on Zoom together. You can endorse them on LinkedIn. You could talk about, what things they could do in the community, and even provide support, whether that's, tickets to a local event or something. And again, a little different in the time that we're living in now, but still very relevant. So as we start this next section, the other thing that I want to highlight is, and Meredith mentioned it earlier in the call, and I think it bears mentioning again, is that we really plan to emphasize the relationship between VISTAs and their supervisors. We believe that's the most critical relationship for the success of the VISTA and the host sites having a really successful year. So we plan to do that in the member orientation as well. And I know that that's been a factor, and that might not seem like a big change for those of you that have been involved in the program in the past. I'm just saying, from Meredith and my perspective, we're even more so focused on that this year. So what that might look like is, that does not mean to say that MNA is not going anywhere and doesn't need to know when things are happening, good, bad, or ugly. We're just saying, we will likely, when we talk to you and there's something happening, we'll listen and understand and do our best to guide, and then say, have you talked to your VISTA about it, and put it back into that space. And the same thing when we're talking with VISTAs. They will likely call at some point being, happy or frustrated about something, and we're saying, yes, we hear you, we listen, and can we help you map out that conversation, but have you talked to your host site supervisor about it? So a real emphasis on building that relationship, I think, is going to make everyone's year very successful. And we just wanted to mention it again here. So let's talk about motivating your VISTA. And again, feel free to chime in here if you have other ideas that have worked well for you in the past, either with VISTAs or other new employees. So understand why they wanted to serve in the first place. That's such a huge thing, right? You remember the first graphic in this section with the little guy hanging off the ledge and the little stick figures. I mean, right, we want to take advantage of the fact that the first couple of weeks, or maybe first 3 months, they're super excited about this. It's going to be a new adventure for them. So try to help connect with that. Talk about their goals. What opportunities do they have for leadership? What do they want to accomplish? Do this visioning thing of, let's say we're talking here in a year from now and we have your exit interview. What is it that you hope you've accomplished? Use performance reviews effectively and constructive criticism. What is the VISTA excelling at? If you have been involved in the program in the past, you know that we have 2 required performance evaluations, one at mid-year and one at the end of the year. If you have a structure in your organization, or one you want to implement that you think works better, in the sense of maybe you want to have more check-ins than that, maybe you want to have a quarterly progress review or performance evaluation, that's totally fine. More check-in points, again, you put a positive spin on those. It's a good time for us to sit back, reflect, see how this stuff is going and what we can do to support. I am all for that. And again, if that makes more sense for your organization, that is a great opportunity as well. As always, remember to provide positive reinforcement, highlight the VISTA's work in various ways. And of course, we all want our work to be relevant and not feel like busy work, and keep that in mind with your VISTA as well. So we really do put an emphasis on the fact that in a VISTA's year, we're really pushing you as host site supervisors to be more in this frame of coaching. But ultimately, coaching stems from supervision. I don't know, Meredith, maybe we should think about calling them host site coaches instead of supervisors. But they're certainly related, but they're not exactly the same thing. Of course, supervision ensures that your VISTA has the right conditions and requirements to perform their service, including a full understanding of your organization's mission, goals, and vision, as well as a solid understanding of your community. Coaching goes one step further. It's about performance, action, and strategies that lead to success. And coaching grows out of that foundation for good supervision. So some of the things in that supervision column are, of course, a weekly check-in. I think we've mentioned that 4 times now. So we're hoping you're hearing that. Creating measurement milestones and progress indicators, providing contact methods. I think this, so this bottom bullet, right? Phone, text, email. This is even more critical in the sense of the virtual working space right now, that you need to be providing those opportunities. But I think the added layer there is provide your expectations. And this can be, what are your expectations as a supervisor, and what are the VISTA's expectations? So if you're a supervisor who pretty much keeps an 8 to 5 schedule and doesn't want to be bothered after 5 p.m., make sure your VISTA knows that, right? Unless it's an emergency, please don't text me after 5 p.m. Maybe you're someone who doesn't like text. Maybe you're saying, I'm sick of getting these casual and really kind of borderline unprofessional texts. So set that up from the beginning. I expect that you'll call me if there's a work issue. So it's just being clear about that. And it kind of goes back to those unspoken norms, right? You think something's appropriate, but if we don't tell the VISTA that, they may not know that either. And then in that coaching and communication column, you're seeing things that are, again, a little bit more in depth, and how to develop that relationship with your VISTA, asking open-ended questions. Again, share with VISTAs your conversation style. That's somewhat what I mentioned around the parameters of communication. So if you know things about yourself, please share them. If you have the questions and can ask them about how they prefer to communicate, that's great too. Being open to hearing any complaints they might have, and try to do your best to do that without judgment, and assist them in finding their own solutions to problems, and protocols for addressing conflict. So kind of an idea of how that's going to go if that comes up through the year. So I think this is a really great quote. When President Johnson welcomed the first group of 20 VISTA volunteers, he said, "Your pay will be low, the conditions of your labor will often be difficult, but you will have the satisfaction of leading a great national effort, and you have the ultimate reward which comes to those who serve their fellow man." And that really is the basis of VISTA, right? We've already gone through the benefits and the advantages for the VISTA, and to a lot of people those seem like very little, but when you're in a workplace and serving to help the greater good, that really does make up for a lot of the other shortcomings. I think the other thing that I do want to put another emphasis on too is something that Meredith mentioned earlier with the performance improvement plan. So of course we all go into the, if VISTAs enter the year with enthusiasm and excitement, we all do as MNA staff members, as VISTA leaders, as site supervisors, just hoping and expecting to have the best year ever. If you've been involved with the program for a little while, you'll know that sometimes it doesn't always work out like that. So regarding our process and performance improvement plan, to Meredith's point, those can work. They don't always mean that a VISTA is on the way out. Sometimes it just means that that VISTA needs really, really clear expectations and clear points for check-in in order to help them succeed, as well as sometimes a wake-up call and a reality check of, you know, you are not living up to what, you know, our expectations are for you, and here's what we need you to get back there. So please know that that is our process for dealing with those shortcomings, and it's a process that we are always going to run, you know, just besides the very, very small number of cases where something major happens and they're just out. Majority of times we have got to go through that process. So I mentioned that here. If you're feeling frustrated with your VISTA, if you're not you know, satisfied and you've had some conversations with them and you can't get them to the next step, please bring us in and think about that performance improvement plan. We want to work with you as the host site supervisor, and we want to work with the VISTA before you're so frustrated that you can't even stand, you know, working with this person and being in the same room with them, right? It sounds extreme, but it happens, let me tell you. So we don't want the call of, you know, we've got to work on this VISTA with this when you and the VISTA are past the point of being able to work together. So that's why we say don't be afraid of that performance improvement plan. Sometimes it's just what they need to get them back on track. And if it's not, if it doesn't work in that way, then we're taking the necessary steps we need to get them, you know, ultimately to closer to not being part of the program or not serving at your host site. But those have to be in place. So again, I am happy to take any questions here. Any suggestions from people on the call? Any things that you have seen worked well for in the past? Happy to just pause here and hear any feedback from people on the call.
Well, I've never been a supervisor before, but when I was a VISTA, one of the things that I think made my year most successful was that when I had my weekly meetings, I made my own agenda. And I think, you know, that was always encouraged to us, but I think some other VISTAs at our host site didn't do that. And so they were sometimes set up for disappointment later when they found out they hadn't been doing what they were expected to do or going in a direction that the organization wanted to go. So just, I guess, encouraging VISTAs to make their own agendas so that they're bringing up what they're doing all the time.
That's a great suggestion, Jennifer. And yeah, Jennifer was a VISTA in our program 2 years ago, I think, and served with the Washington Literacy, and now is on staff there and is transitioning into a leadership role for the VISTAs there. So yeah, I think that what a great leadership opportunity, right? And a practical skill we all need for working in the in an office environment is meeting agendas. So I think that's a great suggestion.
I think too, to jump off of that too, I think finding what's most effective for your VISTA to stay organized. Organization is often one of those things that especially some of the VISTAs that are fresh out of college and in a first time job can struggle with. But finding what works for them, whether that is, you know, Trello is a really great organizational tool. Some people are, you know, handwrite lists kind of people, but having some level of organization and a way to keep people accountable and really for the VISTA to keep themselves accountable is really helpful and can help head off some of the other issues down the line if you can really get the organizational piece down.
One of the things that has really helped, we're on our 3rd year of VISTAs, is to have the to-do sheet that you work on together, and it has changed over those 3 years a lot. I really like it now, but it'll probably change again. Just to be clear about deadlines, be clear about responsibilities. We had our first Vista was really like, I really like to have something I can cross off. And so that, I think, was probably one of the more important things that we work on together to get right.
Yeah, Lori, your to-do list thing is great. I think we shared it out a couple of years ago because it was so good. So yeah, it's huge, and it's one of those like, and again, it's a good jumpstart for weekly check-in meetings of like, look, where are we on this list? And everybody's got 10,000 different deadlines, and especially if you're new to an organization, it's like, well, when is college month even? Like, I don't know. I think I know what it is, and what are the actual deadlines associated, and clarity goes a long way in a lot of things for most folks, for sure.
Well, and the feeling of crossing stuff off, it never gets
accomplishment. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's like, who doesn't like crossing things off of their like never-ending to-do list? It's always a win.
Do you know I've heard that like that's been studied and confirmed that just as humans we really like that feeling. I mean, that's so often why people make lists. I've been the type of person who I'll write something on my list when I've already done it just so I can cross it off. Does anyone have any other thoughts or suggestions that would just be good to share with the whole group of things that you've found to be beneficial in managing people or communicating with colleagues in a virtual space? And this can be anything outside of Vista, but I think that's really, we can't not acknowledge it. We're all doing it. But it is different than very often being in an office and just having those natural connection points when you see someone by the water cooler or in the lunchroom.
We do two things that I think have really helped during this time. One is we had started using Microsoft Teams right before this happened, where we ended up being remote. And Teams is great because it pops up in the corner with a quick question. You can type right in that little screen. So it's like much more immediate than email and has worked really well. The other thing is we do twice monthly games at lunchtime. We play Quick Draw and Oh Hell, which is a card game. And that's kind of kept the staff in touch, given that we have a staggered set schedule back in the office. And I think it might be dying a little bit, but it was really good when everybody was remote working.
I'm gonna borrow that. I like that idea of games. We haven't actually done that. We've done some virtual happy hours, but yeah. I will say, for instance, when we first started working virtually, which of course was mid-March, Meredith and I had a conversation, one of these clear conversations where I was like, I think Meredith maybe prompted it by saying, what do you expect or things to be different? And I said, in the office, if you had a question, you'd just get up from your desk and come stand in my office door and ask me. And I said, and that's okay, right? Like, we don't always have to do that at a set scheduled check-in time. I expect that if you were going to get up and walk to my office and ask me a question, that might be just a quick phone call, 5-minute phone call to say during the workday, so clarifying some of those norms. I know I've told Meredith, you have complete access to me, so don't feel like you have to, not call or schedule something with me, or you can ask me if there's something on my schedule that doesn't work, and can I move that? So a lot of those just like clear expectations that you have to be even more specific about in the virtual space.
Yeah, and something we've been doing, which sounds like it might be a little bit similar to Microsoft Teams that you mentioned, Lori, we've been using Slack. We started using it right before the pandemic started. There's a free version, although we did get a paid business version. But it's like a communication platform that works best for projects. And we have some designated times during the week when everyone on staff is asked to have Slack open. so that we can directly be asking questions to each other instead of having to email or pick up the phone, and it'll pop up a notification that somebody said something. But also, you know, we set aside other times too. If there's a smaller portion of the team that's working on one particular project, they can say, all right, at this time in the week, we're going to work on our project at the same time and have Slack open so we can talk when we have questions.
Yeah, and I've known organizations to have like fun Slack channels too, of like, this is the off-topic Slack channel where you can post jokes and, you know, talk about your weekends or whatever, so that you can kind of sort of mimic the like office banter that is really hard to mimic digitally. Yeah.
We have a fun chit chat channel where we put a lot of memes.
Yeah, a meme Slack channel. I like it. Friends Indeed would be good at that. You guys share memes a lot. It'd be good.
I don't know if they're better, whenever this pandemic is considered done, I think there needs to be a coffee table book of the memes, because my goodness, they're creative and really funny sometimes. And in the beginning of the pandemic, when it was really a hard transition, I kind of lived by those, right? Like just finding some humor in the situation. So the next slide says break. I want to take a quick pulse poll, and Meredith, you get to chime in too. We have only about maybe 4 slides after that and some areas for discussion. Do you guys want to take a break? Are you good plowing through and ending before noon here? All right, Jennifer's on board. Okay, we're just gonna, and Lori and Ashley, I hope that's okay with you. We're just gonna do it, and yep, and go for it. So the next slide I get to talk about too. I know most people on this call have been involved with M&A in the past. So don't forget that one of your requirements of the program is that you maintain an M&A membership, but that's also one of your benefits of the program. When I'm not doing VISTA work, I am doing engagement work, which helps me help members connect with M&A's other resources and benefits. So this is what I do in the other parts of my job. There are a lot of benefits available. One of the best things you can do if you're not familiar with them is jump on our monthly orientation webinar. Those are offered on the second Tuesday of every month at 3 p.m. It's 30 minutes long. It'll tell you what the benefits are and how you access them. Also, please note that your benefits are, your membership is an organization-wide membership, meaning you can have multiple staff access things. You can even extend benefits to your board members. Even if you had key volunteers, we're okay with that. The best way to get access and to unlock your membership is to make sure you know how to log into the M&A website. If you don't, there's some tools online that can help, or you can reach out to my colleague Mario, and he can help you get set up with a username and password. So a few of our biggest benefits are mentioned here on this slide. Grant Station is a really cool benefit that I like to mention to you guys specifically because it is a big benefit of our membership. It's an online grants database that you can search for new grant opportunities, but it can also be really helpful for your VISTAs if in their VISTA year, if one of the functions is fund development or grant writing, they should check out Grant Station, not only to find those grant opportunities, but to also learn about grant writing. Grant Station offers a lot of really great resources that basically is like Grant Writing 101 that someone could read through. We've got other great things. Our compensation and benefit report is helpful to a lot of organizations when they're hiring or putting together compensation packages. I'm the lead staff member on our diversity, inclusion, and equity assessment. A really great tool and starting point for organizations who are looking to start these conversations with their board and their staff. We also, about a year ago, we launched this salary visualization tool, which is an offshoot of the compensation and benefit report. It's an online data visualization tool that you can really customize all around those salary and compensation metrics and all the data that we collect in that report that comes out every other year. So make sure to check that out. Of course, by now, I hope you all know that Census 2020 is important. I hope you've all filled it out. But we are still working to get more people responding to the census, because a fair and accurate count in Michigan is so critical to both our representation at the federal government level, as well as money that comes into the state, and money that comes into the state for the next 10 years. So if you need any more information about Census 2020, check out MNA's resources on that. And we are also trying to provide as many resources for navigating COVID. And there is a specific webpage on our site around that. Lots of webinars and learning opportunities and tools there around COVID. And that is not going to change. We are here for the long haul, as you know, we move out of this initial crisis mode and into the more recovery and reform sections of dealing with a global pandemic. Jennifer, great question. Is the census considered a partisan activity that VISTAs can't participate in? Yes. Unfortunately, we tried very hard when we were reimagining our, about 2 years ago, we had to reimagine our grant to CNCS, and we had this lofty idea that we could have this great cohort of VISTAs working on census. And unfortunately, it's in one of those gray areas that is just too close to the line. So unfortunately, they cannot be doing census activities either. And that's a little disappointing, but we're dealing with it. So if you haven't checked out your MNA member benefits, please do that. Again, getting signed up so you have a username and password to the website is how you will unlock all those benefits. Also, if you're not already, please sign up for our e-newsletters. Those come out, they've been coming out about weekly right now with COVID resources. And our social media presence is also growing. So Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. That's a great way to stay in touch with everything that MNA has going on. Lori, what about activity regarding VISTA as related to racial equity? This is absolutely allowed. Yeah.
Yes, I have an actual, so good timing, Lori, because CNCS actually just sent out an email to all of VISTA members clarifying their stance on racial equality, specifically around Black Lives Matter. We will send that on to you guys generally because it's good information for you. But it's allowable and acceptable because it's not a specific piece of legislation or candidate base. Rather, it is just about social justice and equality. You'd think that that's something that you shouldn't have to clarify, but it is. So good question. Good question on that. Yeah, and great timing. I just got that email like right as the last break started. So nice timing, Lori.
They still shouldn't sign a petition with their VISTA around anything there, but no, we'd love to see a really active and dedicated cohort in a lot of ways this year. And those topics may, obviously are having a renewed focus. So really great. Meredith, I'll turn it back over to you to finish out in our last few slides here.
All right, so I will try and make it quick and easy, especially because all of you guys are either returners or have had some experience with human-centered design. Lucky you. So human-centered design is a project that our cohort takes on every year. And so there are a couple of shifts this year as there were last year, but I wanted to go through essentially what that means and where your supervision ties into it. So for those of you that need a refresher, human-centered design is really about basing the recipients of service in your design for a product or a project or some level of service for folks that you're working with. You think it would be very simple and you think it would be pretty self-evident. Shockingly not so. So our project, our Vistas Complete, a 9-week course in September through November-ish that kind of gives them enough information on human-centered design and the processes around that to kind of be dangerous enough to start their own project. Where you will come in is that our project this year, and as it was last year, which obviously got a little bit derailed due to COVID, but there are an option for Vistas that are undertaking a human-centered design project. So you can either do a host site-based project where they will work with you guys as supervisors collaboratively to understand an issue in a host site that they can use their newfound human-centered design knowledge to help tackle, or they can join a group-based project, which is essentially a good way to meet new Vistas around the state, but it might not be specifically related to your host site. If you're a bigger host site that's got lots of resources and you want to really make your Vista's time worthwhile and very directly related to serving your host site, a host site-based project might be a really good idea. It will probably require more bandwidth from you and your organization in terms of both your attention, but also resources, potentially human capital as well. The other option is a group-based project. So that is good if you either think your Vista's got a little bit of stuff to work on and might not be capable of handling, a full host site-based project. If you guys are a really lean organization and you just don't have people to spare, a group-based project might be a really good option. Or if you're a more remote host site that doesn't have a lot of access to other Vista members, the group-based project is a really good way to meet and work with Vista members around the state. So if your Vista is really hurting for some camaraderie, this is, again, a really good example of when that might happen. So group-based projects are probably going to require you to have less direct supervision and less bandwidth related to it, but the project might not directly relate to you or your organization. So it's all a trade-off. Neither is better or worse, but they're options. So where you guys as supervisors will come in is in November, you and your Vista are going to work together to figure out the best option for the Vista to pursue. It's up to you on a final decision. We're hopefully going to assume that it's going to be, a joint decision on either a host site or a group-based project. We'll get that feedback from you, and we will separate them into either group teams or accountability teams with other Vista members that are doing host site-based projects so that they can kind of continue to work and share resources. So we'll send out more information, but we wanted you guys to know that that's probably going to be coming down the pike in the next 3 months-ish. We're still planning on making this a project even despite COVID. I think that, so keep that in mind as you're determining potentially a group-based or a host site-based project. If your host site has shifted operations pretty drastically and you don't have the bandwidth for a Vista project, totally fair. But if your host site has shifted things and you'd like some human-centered design brain power on that, if it's caused some different issues that you'd like to shift around, this might be a really good opportunity to get your Vista to put some time and effort into making a part of your host site better. So this is going to be a thing. We're going to go through this with our Vistas at orientation. So please know that this is something that Vistas will be working on. It's not a huge time commitment. It's less than 3 to 5 hours a week, but it should be something that they're regularly working on that will connect them to other Vistas and give them some really solid skills that are useful in darn near any area of employment. So if you have any questions about human-centered design, either now or later, let me know. Please reach out. We'd be glad to answer any questions that come up. We'd be glad to help troubleshoot potential host site-based projects. Let us know. We're here to help. Yeah, and good point. The chart is also in your supervisor binder. It's one of the last pages at the very end for your reference. So I think it's important to end on a high note, but also on a note of how much good having a Vista member can really do in a community. So this is a little bit of outdated information, but it's still fairly accurate, that there's almost 10,000 AmeriCorps members broadly serving in the state of Michigan. There's over $60 million in funding that goes towards the programming. There's thousands of local service sites. So there's a fairly large presence of AmeriCorps service in Michigan. Flint is actually the #1 per capita, I believe, concentration of AmeriCorps members in the country. So Michigan is represented well. our particular cohort, so this is some data from this last year. This is 3 quarters of the service year because we're still tabulating the last quarter. And this is despite COVID, despite, you know, some wild year that we've been in. But our VISTA members raised almost $90,000 in grants or direct monetary donations. They've had over $36,000 of in-kind donations. They have managed more than 2,000 volunteers that have performed more than 10,000 hours of volunteer service. And really, I think the more important thing, and the thing that it all really boils down to for all of our organizations, is that because AmeriCorps members served, because our VISTA served, and because you guys, you know, helped to support them as host site supervisors, more than 21,000 people were served and were helped in our state. And that's pretty incredible, and that's what we shoot for, right? That's our goal as we serve in nonprofits and as we work to help people around us. So thank you for the work that you've done as existing supervisors. We're excited for new supervisors to continue this kind of work. And thanks for making the program what it is. It would not be anything without the wonderful supervisors that we have. And I'm not just saying that because you guys joined us over a Zoom call on a Friday, but seriously, thank you for all the work that you've done and all the service that you've supported, because it really does make a difference, and it is a really big contribution to making our state great. So thank you. With that being said, are there any questions that we can help answer? Are there any final reflections that you'd like to share? Is there anything else that we can kind of help troubleshoot before your VISTAs start in like 72 hours?
I do have a question, but I don't know how specific it is to us. We have one VISTA coming on who has a lot of experience with advocacy, and she's been doing a lot of work specific to the school to prison pipeline and trying to advocate against that. And that's not what we do. And I assume, given how much experience she has in it, she plans to continue volunteering in that capacity. How much should I talk to her about that? Obviously, I don't want her to get herself in trouble with VISTA, but I also don't want to tell her, hey, you can't do this thing you're super passionate about. And I know, I mean, obviously she doesn't want to be calling herself a VISTA while she's doing those activities. She shouldn't be wearing her VISTA gear while she's doing those activities. Is there anything else in particular I should be thinking about when I speak with her?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I would say it comes up pretty frequently because kind of by nature of who becomes a VISTA, right? People are pretty plugged into their communities. A lot of people are really passionate about specific things that aren't necessarily directly related to VISTA work. So I would say you pretty much hit the nail on the head of just being really clear with her of, you know, it's got to be in your own time. It can't be related to VISTA. You know, knowing, kind of being sure that she knows where the lines are and keeping that communication back and forth so that if there is something that, like, you know, she has a brain cramp and signs a petition and writes VISTA for Washington literacy or something on there, that she's comfortable coming to you and coming to us and working with it and not just trying to like shove it under the rug and say like, it'll be fine, no one will know about this, like who knows. You know, maintaining that kind of level of communication and really clear expectations. And we'll go through the electoral prohibitions with them too. But that's one of those things where I think it's totally fair. And I think it's something that, you know, maybe you encourage her to spend some PD funds exploring that too and to gain some skills. That's acceptable, but just making sure that she just stays away from the advocacy end of that, which is so tricky, right? Because everything is so intertwined and the insidious part about poverty, right? But yeah, I think you're right. Just being really clear with her and creating a kind of relationship where she's cool with having that dialogue with you is really important. Sarah, other thoughts? Lori, other thoughts? Anybody?
I would just say, right, the biggest caveat is that they're not doing it on VISTA time. So if she's not doing it on VISTA time, you know, there's not much to say about it. In addition, Jennifer, to bring in what you said, right, that's not what Washington literacy does. So she shouldn't be doing it on VISTA time anyway, because on VISTA time, you want her to be improving, people's access to literacy, resources and all that. So I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like, I think we have a lot of discussion, and we'll have a lot of discussion with the Vistas, but if they're not doing it on Vista time, then for the most part, we don't have a lot to say about it.
I would also say too that like this might be, if she, and this is kind of shifting, but it's not unrelated. If she really, really is passionate about, hi buddy, the dog has decided that it's noon and she's ready to go outside. So, if she's really passionate about the school to prison pipeline and that's something that she wants to continue to work on, maybe that's a group-based human-centered design project that she, advocates for, and again, that's more of a conversation with you and Allison and her, that is that feasible? Is that something that, Washington literacy is okay with too? But there are ways to continue to build your skill set around things that you're interested in that aren't directly related to service, as long as you're just aware that your service at host sites come first. So it's something to be creative about, and for sure to acknowledge and validate. Cool. Any other questions or any other thoughts you guys would like to share? The dog is really excited to go for a walk. Anything else? Well, great. Sarah, any last comments that you'd like to share?
No, thank you all for spending the time with us this morning, and being on for next year. We're really excited for it, and can't believe we're already there and starting off. So appreciate your support. Yeah, seconded. And thank you so much for all you do for Vista. We are genuinely just so excited to have yet another cohort year, and we think it's going to be a really great one. So if you ever run into trouble, if you've got questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be glad to work with you on anything that comes up. So thank you for joining our fairly long, but hopefully not too bad, supervisor orientation on Zoom today. Your binders should be there. If they haven't gotten there already, they should be arriving shortly. Otherwise, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.